Welcome to another episode of the Core Podcast. I am delighted to have James Moncrieff join me. I have had the pleasure of knowing James probably for 2 or 3 years now. We didn't have enough time. This is probably one of the longest episodes I've done in ages, but there's so much to unpack. His career from police moving into InfoSec, how it was such a huge barrier for him to join the industry that we both love and are both passionate about, and just his wonderful way of articulating cybersecurity, but putting processes in that make it just feel so achievable and so empowering. I really, really enjoyed this episode, so I hope you enjoy it as much as me. Hello, James. Welcome to the Core Podcast. For anyone that may not know you or doesn't follow you on LinkedIn, could you give us a quick breakdown of James and your current roles and all the wonderful things that you do in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks for having me on. So I'm James Moncrieff. I'm currently the global cyber risk lead at NIQ and GfK. The two companies have merged, and now we are one. I'm an InfoSec professional, and I work across the broad range of InfoSec, from smaller InfoSec teams doing a much broader role right up until where we are now with a large function leading a specific area. Cyber risk is my favorite piece because I like that interaction and that human element to technical risk assessment and accountability. I'm a former police officer, and that's where we are now.
Before we get to your career, young James, childhood James, what was on your dream job? Was it to go into the police? Was that what it started, or did you have some other ambitions? Because when I speak to a lot of people in our industry, genuinely, that wasn't the poster on their wall to go into cybersecurity. So what was your thing? I feel maybe did you have a sports thing that you thought you were going to go to, or was it always the police?
Not really. Not really for sports. I've always played sports, but it wasn't, a career choice. And I think it's changed now that there are kids now with the cybersecurity poster on their wall, because of the way it is. But no, for me, I always wanted to be a firefighter. It was my dream. And when I was 18, I applied, and it's at Essex Fire Brigade, and it was taking, I think it took 18 months of different tests. I passed all the tests, and I was waiting for an interview. And then I saw that the Met Police had come out, and there was more money than the Fire Brigade. So I applied just for fun because I wasn't hearing back from the Fire Brigade. And within 2 months, I was accepted into the police and had a start date. And then I found out I hadn't passed my interview for the Fire Brigade anyway. I mean, it was notoriously hard. There were so many applicants for so few roles in firefighting versus the police. There was a job for everyone if you were good enough to pass the test. So I ended up in the police accidentally. I was 20. I went to Hendon, and it kind of all started from there. I had no desires to be, I didn't know anything about InfoSec until towards the end of my career, really. We'll get onto that. But yeah, I wasn't into tech or IT or anything like
that. So you weren't playing with computers as a kid, or
only my PlayStation 2 and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so you're in the police. How long? You joined at 20. What was that experience like? What did you do while you were in the police force?
So I was there for 15 years in the Met Police, and it was an interesting career. I mean, it's a hard job. And it's there's a funny old atmosphere. Everyone wants to get out in a way. Once you're in, it's that institutionalism. But when you look back, it is a great career, and it was really fun. I was only in uniform for about a year. I went into CID, and I went into a squad called the Crime Squad, which was proactive investigation across the full range of organised crime within a borough level. So I was at Tower Hamlets. I worked my way then through a number of proactive and reactive CID offices, robbery squad, domestic violence, main office CID, dealing with firearms and fraud and attempted murders, until I became a detective. I did that for about 7 years in investigation, and then I went into intelligence. I became a field intelligence officer. And that was very much about the development of intelligence that would come from various sources, whether from informants or from, CCTV or operations or Crime Stoppers or anything else. And it would include, surveillance and pieces of proactive work to try to turn that whisper of intelligence into an investigation that could then be, taken forward. And in that time, I got really interested in informant handling, CHIS, we call them, which is a covert human intelligence source. And I got trained to recruit CHIS. And I made myself responsible for the borough to do, intelligence debriefs. So, people would be arrested off the back of operations. Once they were charged, I would go and see them in their cell and see if I could talk them into becoming an informant. If we had, major issues going on in the borough, gang crime and things like that, I would look at who might be susceptible to, being turned, and then find a way to sort of encounter them and pitch to them to becoming an informant so we could get intelligence about those issues. But it was a very, very interesting world, the world of informants. It's a grey area because you're doing covert policing, which is a different thing, and very, very tight guidelines to protect yourself, protect the informant, and make evidence admissible or intelligence corroborated in order to make evidence admissible. So I loved that, and I loved the communication. I'd been an advanced suspect interviewer. I'd been a child and vulnerable witness interviewer, and then suddenly I was recruiting informants, and I loved the different dynamics between them. And there's a large sort of element of both influence and manipulation within those roles.
Yeah, from obviously experiencing a victim and then taking someone as an informant, how do you moral compass kind of work with that? Because obviously you're asking someone to give you the information, but you also know they're kind of the bad guy. How is that quite a complicated narrative in policing? Because obviously if you've seen children been, a victim of that, is it quite hard? And I know you've got children yourself, is it?
Yeah, it's there are things that are hard. The moral compass never changes. It's all for the benefit of detecting preventing and detecting crime. And anyone can be a victim, no matter how bad they are as well. They become a victim. They shouldn't be a victim, and they need that support of the police. Likewise with suspects, they're human beings that sometimes they've just crossed a line. Very often people are innocent. They've been arrested on suspicion, but they didn't do it, or there's not the evidence. And, you approach everything with that open mind and impartial perspective. When it comes to an informant, they could be from any walk of life, innocent or not. So some informants might be, gang members who want to get one up on their competition. Someone might be a criminal who's trying to avoid prison. You might also get, someone who's a domestic violence victim who can't report their husband or wife or whoever for assaulting them, but their husband happens to be a drug dealer as well. If he goes inside for drugs, she's safe. So there could be any reason someone comes forward to be an informant, and the protection of that person is paramount. Sometimes there's a conflict. There are people who would, deal with pedophiles, and if you recruit a pedophile to be an informant, and you have to maintain that relationship, they have to trust you, and you can call it manipulation. There is an element to it in any kind of agent handling or informant handling, because you're doing what you're doing for the greater good. But at the end of the day, they give you information, they absolutely, or for any reason, they absolutely must be protected. So, I was saying with regards to pedophiles, you might, have to befriend and handle a pedophile, and you don't agree with what they do. But if it's in the greater good of catching more dangerous pedophiles, then, you do what you have to do. So
the chain, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a funny old job, and being able to turn off your emotions and deal with things in that way is really important, and really important in business going forward. How many line managers have got heated with someone, on their team? How many people have presented to the board in a security state, and the board are difficult, and so they get flustered and they can't control that emotion. and none of it's personal. None of it's a human emotional thing. It's work, and that's all it is. So, yeah, you go through that path. It was all morally aligned in that sense, and I went on to become an informant handler, do my full, level 3 training, as they call it, which is incredibly interesting. And then I finished as an intelligence manager. So I ran sort of the intelligence department for the borough. Anything that came in, Tower Hamlets is so diverse, from terrorism to finance in Canary Wharf to street crime to everything else.
Yeah.
The intelligence would come in, my job to protect it, understand it, develop it, and give it to the right people to be handled and developed. Sometimes you could only give certain pieces of information and not others, because something might reveal who an informant is versus another area and stuff like that. So it's very, very careful of information classification on a high risk scale, really.
And interestingly, looking at all your skill sets, I can absolutely see why you've gone into the role that you have, and that actually people within law enforcement backgrounds are trying to be recruited and moved into the cybersecurity space, because you do have a unique skill set and you have a very calm manner about you, and you can probably see the bigger picture, which is obviously very vital in all of this that we do. What was the catalyst of moving from the police force then into more of an infosec role?
Well, funnily enough, while they say law enforcement is sought after, it really isn't, in my experience. Maybe from a technical background or something like that, but transitioning into information security is one of the hardest things I've been through. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I mean, for me, I am an Australian citizen. I got into Queensland Police and I was going to transfer, and I went out there.
That's like, I didn't even know that bit. Okay, fine, yeah.
And this is how it happened. This was, I went out there in November 2016 to do my tests for the Queensland Police, and I got in, and I had a start date the following July, and I just thought to myself, I just don't know if I want to live in Queensland. I could have been posted anywhere, and while that would be fun, just me and my wife. It wouldn't be fun with my kids to drag them around trying to get to the posting of the places that I'd love to live. My family were in Sydney, so I wanted to move to Sydney. But there was no policing option there. I would have had to have started again, gone to college, self-funded and all those pieces. Yeah. So I started looking at security jobs, and this was December 2016. And all I really knew was Word, PowerPoint and Excel. I wasn't very good at them, and still not. And I discovered these jobs called information security, and they paid well, and they looked interesting, and they were for all these different companies. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So I started looking at those job adverts and writing down words I didn't know, and I filled in columns 2 or 3 A4 sheets with different words, everything from CISO to Splunk to ISO 27001 to vulnerability management, things I'd never heard of, and I googled them all. Yeah. And I got to the end and I thought, well, this looks easy enough. I think I'm going to self-study and do this. My wife agreed, and that was it. I started studying. I studied on Cybery, just on the train, in and out. I'm an author, Kelly, and I did all my writing on the train. So I paused my novels for a while and studied instead.
Just paused that, didn't go to Australia. Then I just started studying. I thought, that's easy enough. I'm just going to go into cyber.
Well, it was harder than I thought.
It was your mindset. I don't know anyone like you.
Well, it was harder than I thought once I'd started, but you've got to be positive. So I did my Security Plus study through Cybery. I then did the CISMP certification with a course. And that was funny because everyone else doing that tended to already be in the role and they were ticking a box of the certification. For me, I was so hungry to learn and excited because I didn't know anything. So I went there as though I was going to learn something completely new. Learned those basics and then studied the CISP, on Cyber as well, the CISP syllabus. Yeah. So I went through. I had a pretty decent understanding from a textbook perspective, but it took me 15 months to get a job. At the time there were only junior jobs on small salaries, like graduate jobs, or there were expert jobs on big salaries. And there was nothing in between for me to move laterally. Everyone was in a panic about GDPR coming out, and it was due. And, this was right through 2017. I was applying. I applied for over 100 jobs, and I got 4 interviews out of 100. And I tell you what, Kelly, you say about it being sought after for law enforcement. At one point, it was so bad. I was on the phone to a recruiter who had called me. I won't name them. And he said to me, so have you ever actually put in ISO 27001? And I said, I haven't, but I understand it inside out. I've done this, I've done that. This is what I did in the police. And I was just explaining, and the line went dead. And he just hung up on me mid-sentence once he decided I wasn't already in information security. So not being in the field and not knowing it, and I didn't know anyone in InfoSec at all, it was just constant blindness to my transferable skills. And I did tell people, I can do this. I've done, A, B, and C. If I come in, I can do this.
Where does this self-belief come from, James, though? Like, I'll be honest, I would have, if I'd done 100 applications and a recruiter had hung up on me, I probably would have gone, yeah, no, this is not going to happen. I'm going to go to Australia, like just stick to what I know. What is that inside you that's self-driven? Do you know?
Well, it'd become a bit of a mission by then. I was driven to move to Australia anyway, and doing the career change would have allowed me to then get a job in Sydney. Ultimately, it happened,
that was
but
the goal to be in Sydney.
It just took me too long to get there before my kids were too old to go there. We can still go later. Like I said, I'm a citizen, so we can, go to and fro however we like.
Yeah.
It was a test of resilience. I'll be honest. It was hard sometimes with that rejection and almost just a brick wall to get through. When I eventually got a job, I was employed by a wonderful woman, Sarah Pope, if she's listening. I'd been to an interview with Lloyds Bank that day. It was my 3rd interview.
I love that. I just went to Lloyds Bank. It wasn't like a small, you didn't go small, James. You went big. Okay, yeah.
Well, they had, with a bank, you have, 500 or 1,000 people within security, and, there are roles and structures to get employed by to learn. I now know that's not my thing. I love a much, much broader scope, and I like to be involved in everything, which I did later in my career. But I had an interview, and it went quite well. And I came out, went back across London, got a coffee, and I was sitting on the train, and I was exhausted. And then I got a phone call from GLH Hotels, fantastic company. And they said, oh, could you come in for an interview today? And I was on the train, and I just thought, oh, I'm so tired. But I said, yeah, okay, I'll come and do it. And I just knew it was another trip across London for more rejection. So I got off the train before it left Fenchurch Street, went up to North London, went into the interview, and I just sat down. I said, look, this is what I'm facing. This is what I can do. I can do this because I can do anything I set my mind to. And I've learned this, and I'm going to have there's a lot more to learn, but I can get it done if you give me a chance. And we talked for a while. The DPO and the head of technology interviewed me. And then on the train home, I got a call on the train home from HR to say they know that you've got a lot to learn, but they liked your attitude so much, they'd like to offer you a job. So I got the job that day because I just went and said, look.
Was that amazing? How was the feeling of that?
It was, the feeling of relief. It when you've got relief like that, I often say when you do public speaking, and I do a bit, the adrenaline builds up so much that at the end there's a feeling of elation and exhaustion mixed. When you do something, a challenge that's so monumentous to you, and it was the same with some of the sporting things I've done, when that line's finally crossed, the feeling of relief just feels like exhaustion. And there's an element of elation because you've done it, but it's mixed with exhaustion. And it's the funniest place. I suppose it's the best place to be, but it's a really weird feeling. And so I got that, and having, to know that I'd done it and I'd got in. That was one thing, but I also knew, now I've actually got to do it. And all I know is the books. And on my first day, we had a meeting at Google, and I sat there in that meeting taking notes of things I'd never heard of so I could come out and look them up later. And it was a massive, massive learning curve. What was I going to say? Yeah, it's a massive learning curve. I was lucky enough to be on the IT team with just some of the best people I've ever worked with. And, you know, I'm very humble in the sense of I know I don't know what I don't know, and I want to learn, and I'm never, never defensive about things like that. So for me, I just absorbed everything they could tell me. And I didn't know anything, really. I thought I did. I mean, suddenly I got there and I said, well, you need to patch that. That's easy. And they said, well, we can't patch that because it relies on this legacy system. It relies on that legacy system. And if we were to change that one, it's going to break all of this. And you think, wow, okay, so the real life, the real world is very, very different.
Like anything you learn, though, right?
Yeah.
Any topic. I think I've always said, like, I did my marketing degree. I didn't really start learning marketing until I was in it. Like, it was just theory and textbooks and everything's like in a perfect scenario. Yeah, and I probably was absolutely the same for you, right? And it's not perfect and movable parts and people. So you mentioned, was it Susan? You said Susan Pope?
No, Sarah Pope.
Sorry, Sarah Pope. You mentioned Sarah Pope. Yeah. So that was that one person that believed in you, pulled you up. You said you were in a really great team. So obviously the culture of the team was great for you, nurtured. Did you have imposter syndrome at any point? Or were you just...
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say
multiple times throughout my career. And imposter syndrome is an overused term, and it doesn't always fit what people think it does. I've recently trained as an exec coach. I said that to you earlier, and in there's a big piece on imposter syndrome and when it's real and when it isn't. But I mean, for me, yes, absolutely. So in that first 6 months, there was no one else there who did InfoSec. They didn't have InfoSec in that company. The DPO said, who's your InfoSec person? And they said, what's InfoSec? So I had a chance to come in and do it and learn and do it my way and do it the way I'd learned in the CISP study. But at the same time, I didn't have any guidance. And about 6 months into being there, a new director of technology started, CTO in essence. And he pulled me up and said, well, yeah, you've done all this, but what are you doing about it? Where's, you're not doing your job properly. Where's all the action? How are you changing the company? And that really shocked me. And I thought, wow, I'd been thinking the whole 6 months, I'm identifying these gaps, but how do I get anyone to do anything? And this is still an issue I see in people in security at all different levels. There's no understanding of, okay, how do I now make change with what I know I need to change? And this man came in and he said, you get me the top risks by Friday. So I took everything I knew. I sat up all night. And bear in mind, I was brand new, so I was feeling it out. And I developed this report based on everything in the whole company, gave it to him Friday. And he loved it. And we were then on our way. And then from there, I learned how to hold people accountable, but by education. But then, with the side piece of, okay, but you're still accountable for this. What are you going to do? And there were multiple times through my career where I faced challenges of things that best practice study didn't prepare me for. When I was in Arcadia Group, I was security architect there. Again, another job where I managed to get a role as a security architect, and I knew I could do it, but I didn't really know how at the time. I just knew I'd have to go in and have that self-belief. And again, imposter syndrome, nudges at the back of your mind, and you just have to say, sit down, I'll let you in if I really can't do it. And I got there and I discovered that at that time, no one really knew what a security architect is. Everywhere you see that role, it's a different role every time. Sometimes it's solution design. Sometimes it's hands-on cloud security engineering. Sometimes it's strategic and aligned to TOGAF and SABSO. They're all completely different roles. So I carved out a role that I thought suited me with three pieces. I developed a method of doing secure design within the business and a principle-based term versus controls that gave options to people to have scalable and dynamic solutions. And I aligned the strategy by digging into the business differently, and looking at value chains instead of systems and other capabilities. There were, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I have a point. There were many people arguing over whose system was most important. And ultimately I said, well, okay, we're our Arcadia Group, top shop, top man, everything, Dorothy Perkins. I said, what matters most to the CEO? Really, he cares about, can a customer go online and buy clothes? If they can buy clothes, can they pay for them? If they pay for them, can we deliver them? If we deliver them, can we balance our stock? Can we run the warehouse, the distribution center? Can we onboard an employee? Can we pay an employee? All of those pieces became value chains that the business needed to achieve in order to make money. Some of them supported it, some of them made money. In order to then allow a customer to go online and buy clothes, then you need to have a website. It has to look good. It has to not be taken down by attackers. The pricing needs to be accurate. The pictures need to be accurate. The iframe with the payment piece needs to be protected. Yeah. All those things had to go hand in hand in order to fulfill that value chain. So once I started to look at, okay, in order to run Arcadia Group, we need to do these 20 things. And in each of those 20 things, these things matter. Well, what's the impact of a loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability on each of those things? And then we look at them from value chain, and suddenly you've got a piece of the business and every system within it, and every person within it, and every bit of data within it fits the CIA definition, the impact rating, and you can start to prioritize where you target with security tooling, where you target with controls and education, and all those pieces like that. And that helped define a strategy, which I've then taken forward that methodology into other places like GfK. And it's been really impactful. So the point I was making was, every time I had that imposter syndrome, it was usually because I'd identified that there's nothing in the textbooks for security that deals with this. Security is new. We have frameworks for a reason. As an aide-memoire, it doesn't mean everything's relevant. We can't just put everything in blindly because it costs a fortune and no one ever gets done and people get security fatigue. So every time I've had to come up with a new way to achieve something. And having fresh eyes as a career changer, I was always able to see it from a different angle. Yeah. And every time I had that feeling, I created something that then made me better, and made my understanding better. And my career developed from there through innovation, understanding what mattered, changing it, coming out with new ways, and then putting that into place and trialing it. And now that's become what I love to do in security and exec coaching, in the sense of I'd see myself as an academic in the workplace. Everything I do is about understanding what needs to be done, developing a way to do it more efficiently, more cost effectively, trialing it, talking about it, pushing it out there, and eventually it becoming the way that everyone does. So that's how I now live my career.
And there's so many things to unpack about that, because you see a problem, so you research, you identify a process. If the process doesn't exist or doesn't fit for purpose, you then recreate something. You're also not risk averse. You'll trial it, you'll look at it, which are all incredible traits that you probably learned along the way from all your different career to make you that. And also, you're just growing, aren't you? As a human to career to everything, like you said, you're an academic and you want to learn and improve. So that means that you're good at your job. And it also means that not anyone can do a job, but it does mean if you have the right mindset, the right tool set, and the right mentor and environment around you. And it also highlights the importance of having diversity, of you saying, I came in looking at it in a completely different perspective. It made me look at it differently. I did a great podcast last week, and they were talking about how there was a group of engineers and they'd done a speed test on a new train, and what they couldn't understand, it was always like a minute behind, but everything mathematically was perfect. Right. Couldn't understand why. So they brought in a couple more engineers that ended up being women, and they went, well, yeah, it's behind because you haven't calculated people getting on the train. And it was just someone else looking at it from a different perspective. And they also apparently came up with, well, that area is quite high with mums, so they'll have prams, so that will slow it down. And they just saw it in a completely different way. And I think that just makes it so important, and why, like, your story, really. If you hadn't been so persistent, believed in yourself so much, we wouldn't have you here. And that's quite sad, really.
Yeah,
So
and it's the same for
important.
every person, isn't it, that comes in? And we held a career fair at GFK,
Okay.
not last summer, the summer before, and we had people in who had been trying to get into the industry for years, and they just kept getting the door slammed in their face. One of the reasons is, and I've seen this, there are many security people, rightly or wrongly, they don't mean it badly. They all just want the best for security. There are many security people who think or feel the rest of the world can't do our jobs. And they can't at the time, just like we can't do theirs. But then there's the point to remember that it's actually much, much easier to learn the principles of security, which really are quite straightforward as principles, than it is to learn 15 years of technical development, 15 years of infrastructure administration, 15 years of risk management and communication in my sense, 15 years of, I don't know, all sorts of things that people in all walks of life, from teachers to actors to engineers to, anyone else would do. And yes, if I now wanted to become an application security specialist, there's a great deal to learn, because I need to learn coding and development from scratch, platform management, CI/CD pipelines. And that's a huge amount to learn. But to someone who is a developer, who knows those pieces inside out already from years of work, learning how to apply the principles of security to those pieces is really, really simple. And one of the strongest pieces of any security leader is understanding where to leverage those skills, not needing to be able to do everything yourself. I've spoken to, I've seen lots of different jobs in the past, and I've chatted to people who are hiring, both where I'm in the process and when I'm not. And there are many startups that go from startup to scale up, and they're in that process, and they say, well, we need someone security focused. And very often they'll say, well, we don't quite need someone at that strategic level yet. We need someone hands-on. And that's fine. But if you don't come in at the strategic level, you don't understand the business properly, and you don't prioritize. A lot of time is often wasted putting in pieces, from a hands-on perspective, putting those technical controls in and missing wide open doors, not covering full bases. I always say to people who work with me and people I mentor at different levels that, okay, you've got your area, that's fine. If you're going up the principal route, that's fine. If you want to go to the head of InfoSec and CISO route, could you now go into a company with no security on your own and define a security program and put it in place? And if you can't do that yet, why can't you do that yet? Because it is relatively straightforward if you follow, certain processes and thought processes. And developing that piece, coming away from that and developing those broader pieces, I think is really impactful for any role in security to understand. Once you step outside of your lane and you learn why that lane is impacting other areas, it makes all the difference in how effective you are. And that's where the careers develop.
For GFK, obviously, it's a global company. I imagine there's lots of things that come up. Are there any key challenges that you feel like you faced while you've been there or had to tackle? Or
Yeah, I mean, without going into details about the company, of course, and their security, within my area, I was GRC manager there. So I set up the GRC function globally. And in that, there's a great misconception of GRC in a lot of places. It sounds like the checklist and policy team, just saying it. And to many people,
you not walk around with a clipboard?
No, not anymore. And to many people it is. But what a lot of people don't realize is in a smaller security team or in a smaller company, say there's an InfoSec manager and two analysts and an ISO, the work that they do predominantly would be GRC work. GRC is the foundation of InfoSec. So risk management, governance and policies, reporting upwards to whichever leader you report up to, third-party risk management, the coordination of vulnerability management, the coordination of secure development. Having a SOC internally is a very, very rare luxury and shouldn't be done by anyone that can't handle it. So you'd have an outsourced SOC anyway at that point. vulnerability management in small companies is very often done by the IT teams themselves, and it has that oversight from security. Application security and product security are an extreme luxury for a small company. And ultimately, you go down the line of having an SDLC, having a tight relationship, defining secure development practices, and making sure you have, secure coding in place and a pipeline in which to bring that back for fixes if you need it. And a risk escalation pathway. That's GRC work, ultimately, is the foundation of all of InfoSec. So that was a challenge, actually, in GfK, which was a real tech-led security team and a wonderful security team, and they all are and they still are. But to lay that foundation, some of the leadership didn't necessarily see the value in that foundation at the time. Okay. So to change that perception, bring things back from, and this happens everywhere, bring things back from buying tools and going with what you think you need to do, or filling out a framework for the sake of it, and thinking you're there because for your scope you've done it and you've written the policies and an auditor gives you the nod, does not mean you're secure. So coming back from that in everywhere I've worked has been a big challenge, and it was no different in GfK. One of the other areas of challenge is in changing the mindset to risk. Everywhere does risk differently. A lot of people will list their threats and vulnerabilities as risk. Ransomware, they will call a risk. Ultimately, it's a threat. The risk is there will be a loss of availability of data and systems as a result of that ransomware. People will list shadow IT as a risk instead of the vulnerability and the gap that it is, that you've got uncontrolled systems with uncontrolled vulnerabilities and access control touching your network and holding your data. So changing that perception and bringing people back in line to understanding what could happen as a result of those gaps. We often say if there's a threat of rain and you don't have an umbrella, the risk is you'll get wet. The rain isn't the risk, it's the threat. Right. The umbrella is your control measure. It keeps you dry. If you don't have it, you have a vulnerability, and then you have a risk of getting wet.
Very good way of explaining it.
Well, how impactful that risk is really depends on where you're going. If you're going to Morrison's for groceries, maybe it doesn't matter if you get wet. Maybe you don't need that umbrella.
If it's your wedding day and you've got an outdoor ceremony.
If it's there are other control measures to be considered. I was going to say, if you're going for a job interview and you have to get there dry and on time, maybe you go beyond the umbrella and you invest in the control measure to get a taxi. That's where you apply that risk management. But going into that mindset and changing things and looking at, okay, what really matters to the business? What could actually bring the business down versus what just hurts? What part of that framework and posture and systemic issues really impact that story? And then at the bottom, how do we now hold people accountable for, 1,000 vulnerabilities and issues? Probably a lot more than that in most companies, of course. 1,000 vulnerabilities and issues. How do we go from a culture of exception, as in, please be secure, I don't want to, give me an exception and approve it, to a culture of accountability and acceptance instead of exception, and risk mitigation by translating it into what really matters to the business? What are these things you don't understand actually going to do to you and your business? And if you can't do them and you don't want to do them, that's fine, it's your prerogative. But how does that impact the rest of the organization? And how are you going to be accountable for your decisions and your actions? You're a boss, you're paid for it. So how are we now going to apply that and give you an informed decision? And that's, one of the issues with insider threats in that sense. There are...
Well, we did this in Bulgaria, didn't we? We did the, when we tested the idea of someone being an insider threat, and they removed IP and moved to their competitor and things like that. So I experienced that with you guys. So yeah,
we did, and that was a really good event and a really good walk through that crisis simulation that we really enjoyed. But the problem with insider threats is they're so misunderstood in the sense of coming from a background of protecting intelligence and considering corruption versus just considering security. Very often, we hear everyone in security say, well, it's either accidental or it's malicious. And really, it's really not that simple. Unless it's just you and your mum running a corner shop or running a printing business or something, how do you really know everyone you work with? How do you know all their pieces? And I define them into different stages. There is the genuine accidental, who will do something wrong, tick a box. But then next to that is the manipulated, the people who have had a phone call, been duped. Phishing steps into manipulation, not just accidents. Then we go one step further and we talk about the duress. What about if you've got people who have done something wrong or done someone a favor and now they feel compelled to do something, or someone said, okay, do this or I'm going to grass on you for that? What if that person feels under duress in their own circumstances? We might say, oh, well, yeah, we survived COVID. They've all still got their jobs. But what if that person's partner, husband, wife, lost their personal training business because of COVID? And we don't know their financial situation. We don't know where they are or what they're going through. So we really don't know if the people we really trust aren't desperate. Then you get through to the opportunistic. You know, you give people keys to the kingdom. There was a test in North America years ago, and they asked I I can't cite the study, but they asked healthcare workers if they would sell patient
records
information for money. It was anonymous, and 75% of people said they would.
Wasn't it quite low as well? It wasn't a lot of money.
Yeah,
it was that a different study? It was like something like 250 quid, and it was like,
I can't remember the details, but it was like 75% of people said they would. And when it comes to money and it comes to those things, this is before we get to what I call the nasty, which are the people who are there to be malicious for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And then the infiltrator, who are the people that are deployed in order to commit crime. And they could come in as a network admin already set up to leak information and open doors and those pieces. We look at SolarWinds and, you know, the potential for someone to have got a job, especially to deploy malware into a development pipeline and let that get through to everyone in the world. It's incredibly clever in that sense, but there's a whole myriad of people, from the people who made the accident right through to the people that want to do it. And all the controls that we have in place, everything we do proactively with training and awareness and limiting data and putting in defense in depth, of which most companies, you know, medium companies certainly don't have a proper defense in depth to manage these things, all the way through to, without the controls we have in place, we do it all the way through to reactive things and with our visibility and within our SIEM tools and EDR. And you still can't stop someone making a phone call, working from home, reading a screen out to someone on the other end. You can't stop them sitting down and writing something down on a piece of paper. You can't stop someone, you know, sending an algorithm out or opening a door or sharing their password and giving someone their phone to do the MFA or letting them in or whatever it is. You still can't stop a human doing it. All you can hope to do is change culture in order to do that.
That's the first time I've heard anyone explain insider threat with all those diverse options. Normally, like you said, it's either accidental or malicious, where you said, no, there's a spectrum along that. Yeah. For the police, you had to go through an interview process. Fire brigade, you would have. Army has to go through rigorous testing. You know, they've talked about Met Police about doing more psychology tests and things because of recent news. Do you think there's an element then of interview process of someone that could be in a job that could cause damage? Do you think we're too lax on that? Or do you think there will ever come a point where it's done like that?
I don't think so, because any human can make any decision. It's just really hard to. All we can really do is proactively put that defense in depth in place, have genuine least privilege within your organization at every level, internally and not, have genuine segmentation, have genuine privilege access control. You know, like we said, data leakage, it can still occur one way or another. Yes, the controls can help. They're notoriously difficult to put in place and run properly, but it's coming away from solving problems with tools and looking at, okay, you ask people about PAM and they say, well, which tool? And PAM doesn't start with a tool. It starts with the philosophy of privileged access management. And what does that mean? And how does that work? And how do we separate that? How do we create a defense in depth? One of the elements of looking at key assets within those value chains and an extinction level event that I talked about earlier was talking about, well, okay, if an attacker gets in, how are they going to lead to that? How does it turn from a small attack to a bad day to the death of the company? And what do you need to do in that, you know, that area to fix it? You know, compromise is inevitable, always, one way or another. having really good tooling, really good visibility, but also proactively preventing those attacks from escalating is the only proactive measure you can do in that sense.
Yeah.
Let's say in an ideal world, if ransomware is your biggest risk, your biggest threat, and the loss of availability by ransomware, and it isn't for everyone, despite the the rhetoric
Marketing
around
jargon.
ransomware. Yeah.
The marketing teams that push certain
Well,
topics.
yeah, a lot of the things we do comes from the vendors and what they're protecting against. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you get to that world that doesn't really exist, but the point where you can say, oh, we've been attacked, well, who cares? Because they can't get to our key assets. It's just going to cost us this in incident response. That's not great, but they're not going to get to our key assets. Or, oh, they
It's
did get to
interesting you say that. We did a podcast with Lee Morton from On the Beach, and he said very, very similar. He was just like, let them walk around my house. Go for it. They can't take anything of value. They can take my pots and pans. They can take my nice cushions. But he said, as long as you know the money, the jewelry, the watch, the things that cannot be replaced in somewhere that someone can't find or cannot get in, he was like, I'm not worried. They can walk around my house. So you're
I
kind of
wouldn't go as far as not being worried, because it's not nice,
yeah.
and it might still cost a bit, and you might still have a damaged front door. But at the same time, yes, there's a bad day and there's the death of an organization.
Yeah.
And you might then get to the point where they say, oh, they have got to our key asset and they've deployed ransomware. That might be a critical database. You say, but who cares? Because we've got proper offline backups they can't get to. Now it's going to cost us a bit more in incident response, but we can now bring it back. And it's obviously much more complex than that. And it's not that easy to eliminate a threat that's already in your network, and they may well come back, and you don't want to open that door to your offline backups or whatever. But the thought process still exists. How do we stop something small becoming something big? And with the insider threats in that piece, those doors can be opened, so you can only proactively look at what matters to you and understand how you can't stop every attack, because you can't plug everything up. And with insiders, they can still do it. But understanding what matters to you and what is going to sink you, and then focusing on that, can be the only proactive way around it.
Speaking to you you've made cybersecurity seem quite calm. Because you're quite problematic and you're straightforward, where other podcasts are like, well, this is coming this way and this is going to happen and these are all the problems. And it makes you think, like when we talk about the planet and, global warming, if you put all the information, you feel frozen, like you can't move, where you've said it very, I know it's not that perfect, but like case by case, how you do it, here's a structure, here's a process. It makes it feel more manageable. Like we can actually combat this, we can make a difference, we can work together with it. We've talked about human intelligence in the context of cybersecurity, and that person could actually be a threat, but do you think there's a human element that actually makes them a line of defense, or what do you think the future of that sort of thing is? Or is there any challenges and insights that you're seeing around the human IT piece?
Yeah, it is. I don't know if anyone will ever do it. I don't know if it's desired. It's certainly an easy thing to do to open some doors to potentially stopping incidents. But ultimately, you can use human intelligence in an organization. Yes, we've got that problem that we've said, and we can't stop all those insider threats, and we don't know what they're going to do, whether they are innocent people who are under pressure or anything else. The people that see things on the ground are very often the humans that see unusual behavior, or they can't speak up for whatever reason. One of the examples I used before was, imagine you work in a hotel group, and from two people from a culture somewhere who have moved to the UK. One of them gets a job in a hotel and they're cleaning rooms. They then get a member of their family a job in the hotel. They could come from anywhere and be of anyone. They get a job in their family cleaning that hotel. And then the person who they get a job starts stealing. You see what matters more to them, their community and their family, or the job and the hotel. And you see if that information comes forward or if it gets covered up. And that, like I said, that can be any community. You see then a community, and I use communities because that intrinsic pressure within communities can be so strong.
Yeah.
someone in that community who's influential finds out that that person is working in a hotel. And then they say, I want you to start getting photos of people's passports and give them to me because we're doing something. And we could be talking about terrorism or crime or anything else. And that person says, well, I can't, it's my job and it's wrong. And they say, do you want to belong in this community or not? This is an influential person. It goes so deep. And at that point, they then start to do what they need to do. They do one favor. And then that person turns around and says, now I need you to do this. If you don't do it, I'm going to tell the community about what you did with those passports. And it just grows. I often talk about the program Line of Duty. It's obviously a great program. And the one thing they really get right is how lives spiral out of control within a world of corruption. Something small just spirals. Some people are already nasty. Other people just aren't, and their world spirals. And that happens. And it happens day in, day out everywhere. A lot of people would talk about the sensitivity of a company as well. And they will say, well, we're not a bank. We're not the government. Why do we need to do all that? But then you've got the other hand that, okay, so while a bank might already have all the controls to deal with this and not worry about it, it might be retail or hospitality that has the highest turnover of staff, not necessarily people who have been there for 20 years and been in this career for 20 years with all those expertise, but the highest turnover of staff of all kinds that come in. They're paid less, they're under pressure, there's less controls. It's much, much easier to get that information. And a GDPR fine to a fashion retail outlet is one of the biggest issues they could possibly have. CRM leak data goes out, and then they face that fine. It's terrifying. Very, very different to what might scare a government agency or scare a bank or scare anyone else. And so then we get these areas of high impact but high security, and then low impact but low security, and they're even harder to fix. You can't then also rely on compliance, and so you have to do this because. So then you have to convince people why they want to be secure, and that's better ultimately, because if someone needs to be compliant and then one day they don't think they need to comply with something for whatever reason, they won't necessarily do it. They'll just say, oh, it's not PII. I don't have to worry about security today, that kind of thing. You convince someone why they need to be secure, they will want to be secure, whether it's they need compliance or not. So there's two different cultures that help. Human intelligence, I often talk about, is those people, the only people that can really prevent or detect those issues are the people on the ground. Now, at the moment, one of the biggest issues are what are their options? What happens? They either whistle blow and you get an anonymous message that you can't really use. It might give you a tip off to look at. It's not corroborated intelligence. Nothing pops up on your limited SIEM visibility. What are you going to do with it? Or they become a witness. HR make them a witness. They out them and throw them under the bus. Suddenly they're branded a grass. Suddenly they're branded untrustworthy. Suddenly their whole career changes because of coming forward. And it doesn't need to be like that. Military, the police, they all use informants. They all use agents of one kind or another to give them information. And why and how? Because they can protect them. And they go to the ends of the earth to protect them. And there's no reason why, if someone's seeing something, they can't come to you because they understand that they're going to be protected. It's not going to affect their career. It's never going to come out. Then you ask yourself, well, how do I anonymously make intelligence powerful and take it forward? One of the things they use in policing and stuff is sanitization. And that is to take the unsanitized information with all the detail, lock it up in a place that no one else can see it, the tightest access control you can possibly fathom, but it's held in case a judge ever needed to see it. And then sanitize that intelligence by taking out everything that could identify that person. And it might even be, he or she has, this in their drawer in their desk. If that's the only person who he or she has ever shown, it's gonna out them. So you have to think about every action you take if it exposes someone. It's hard to put in a quick sort of 10-minute podcast.
No, but when you're sanitizing it though, like how because if it does, I assume in the police, you're going to take it to court or it's going to be evidence. What's the process of making sure you don't strip out too much that you've removed the value? Because I guess there has to be a real fine balance, because
Yes.
removing too much of the detail might allow them to not go down because it's not detailed enough. So how do you tie that person to something? So how do you find the sweet spot of protecting that person but making sure that the evidence still has enough juiciness to it?
Well, one of the main ways is, I mean, it's intelligence, not evidence to start with.
Right.
So
Okay.
that intelligence only needs to be used to justify your next step. So to ensure that it's proportional, necessary, to make sure there's no collateral intrusion and that there's a material benefit to it, you need to be able to show that that intelligence is enough for a search warrant or for surveillance.
Okay, so it's the trigger.
So you can reduce it right down to the bare bones. But the point is, so what they do is they will sanitize intelligence. They will turn it into, they'll sanitize unsanitized intelligence. They'll then have a sanitized report. But in order to make the judge understand what it is, there's a grading system. So let's say there's A to E of how trustworthy the source is. They might be unknown. They might be very trustworthy, like CCTV and DNA, or they might be somewhere in between. And then 1 to 5 of how they know that information. Either they saw it personally, or they've heard about it from someone they trust, or they've heard about it third hand, but it's corroborated versus it's a bit of a whisper in the wind. And you can take that grading and you can then say, okay, this intelligence has a B2 grading. It's really good. The judge can look at that and know that B2 means that informant is this person. It doesn't matter who they are, but they know it personally and they're a proven reliable source. At that point, he can say, or she can say, okay, great. So it's B2 that says John sells drugs, and it's at his house. We'll give you a search warrant without having to say, I know John sells drugs because he stands outside my front door and I've got a red gate. John knows who's got the red gate and he knows where he stands. So it's to that point. And then the most important questions are what they're called the provenance questions. How do you know? Who else knows? When did you first and last know? And based on that provenance, you can look at that intelligence and decide really whether it's useful or not, whether it needs corroboration later, or whether it's good to go to act on. And who else knows is vital. Like we said, if someone says, Sally's got a gun under her bed, but only the informant's ever been shown that gun, if a firearms team goes through the door, Sally immediately knows who grassed her up and the informant gets shot. So it's really, really sensitive, and every piece of it needs to be considered. And those provenance questions give you that. So again, the method would be firstly making sure people are aware they can come to you and you'll be protected. Taking that unsanitized intelligence with the provenance questioning and putting that in the tightest, securest box you can possibly imagine. But from that information, bringing out a grading and sanitized intelligence that you can then take forward to HR, the security team, whoever else, internal investigations. And they know, okay, this person is doing A, B, and C. It's from someone who's untested. We don't know if they're reliable or not, but they've seen it personally on 10 occasions. Okay, now we can go forward and do something with it. It's more than just an anonymous line, and it never throws anyone under the bus.
And do you think that should be in all elements of work? Like not just about cyber, but anything that, ill toward or shouldn't be, that there should be a process like that you could gather because, I don't know, like Me Too Move It, all those things. If there had been a process where people could have done that, they could have been secure, the data and the information would have come far, far quicker than how long. Do you think actually it's very important in cyber? I understand that, but also in all walks of power, influence, anywhere that you could do something. Do you think that could be not just human IT, but actually a process for HR?
Yeah, absolutely. It could be such a powerful process. And like I said, it doesn't mean anyone's going to come forward. It doesn't mean that it's going to solve all your problems. What it does mean is that there is an option there and you're set up. If you haven't defined how you define, a B2 rated person in documentation, then you can't do it when it happens at the time.
Right.
Things have to be governed. They have to be in place so that you can go forward and say, I am not going to show you the unsanitized information. I am going to protect that person. But you do need to act because in line with our agreed process, they are this level. And so it costs nothing to put that in place. It costs nothing to just open your mind to another way to deal with things and offer things to people. There's then the question, if we're breeding grasses, so to speak, it's a horrible term, but if we're breeding grasses, why do we trust this company? And ultimately, only a bad person would really think that, and you don't want them in it. It's about how you approach it.
They've got something they want hidden.
Yeah, it's about communication, and it's about, we're here to protect all of you. And what if you end up in this situation? If someone's under duress to do something and they come forward like that and they say, I've done something small, but now they're trying to make me do this. I need protection, and we can deal with it. It's how it works, and it's how all of law enforcement and all of military work. It's in the bedrock of all of it, and they're the most crucial pieces. And that includes every area of government. And potentially already exists in traditional financial institutions and in their ethics teams and investigation teams, but it's just rarely spoken about in InfoSec.
No.
And this is one of the things that I was talking about with InfoSec being young. It is young in the sense of what it's evolving so quickly. We have frameworks. We have the way that was predefined back when it wasn't as populated with people with understanding and experience. And it doesn't mean it's all the way. The term value chain is regularly used within architecture, rarely used within security. The talk about managing intelligence and helping people come forward is never spoken about in security in the areas I've been in. There are so many things that we could keep doing that people from other careers can bring in.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember as my mum used to work for Barclays, and she was never allowed any debt. They always checked that she wasn't allowed debt because I think she managed. Anyway, she had access to cash, and she managed back in the day. So she wasn't. They were checked, and they monitored how she spent her paycheck and how quickly the money went, because obviously she would be a risk factor because she had access to cash. And I remember her telling me that. I mean, she was there pre my birth, so that was early 80s. So you think that was put in place in financial? I mean, we definitely don't do it here at Quarter Cloud or check that. And obviously people have access to people's data. James, I've just realized how the time is. And I could probably speak to you way longer. And we haven't even touched on the fact that you write books, you cycle, you hammer throw. And I think that's a whole other topic of all these incredible things that you do, but probably supports your career and your job. I always close the podcast with one final question, but you've kind of answered it. But anyone listening that hasn't joined us in cybersecurity, why would you tell them to persevere and try and join cybersecurity in some way, or InfoSec?
Because you can make a difference. And when you have that imposter syndrome, because you're not one of the traditional InfoSec people, that doesn't mean you haven't got skills they haven't. And, they're all wonderful. They're all, some of them are absolute wizards, incredible brains. But it doesn't mean they can necessarily speak to a board or relate to someone or do an investigation or translate a technical finding into a risk. You might be an actor that's got a way with communication and understanding body language that no one else has. You might be a sports coach who knows how to educate people and solve problems strategically and look at the pieces of the puzzle. You might be a business analyst that knows how to really pull apart what's actually happening and turn it into a picture that allows a strategy to be not only landed with the board, but then told to the rest of the business, and to get their buy-in rather than their compliance, because agreement is completely different to compliance. And it's worth persevering because the industry needs everyone of every kind, because it needs to grow, because it's still, everything works, sure, but it's not optimal yet in this industry. And we're all still learning things every day. And everyone's input is valid in that sense. The things I've done have been successful. They're not the only way. No one has to do them. that they're welcome to. I always talk about them, I present on them, I write about them. And some of the feedback from different people has been great of where it's helped them look at things from a different mindset. So bring yourself into InfoSec. Generally, you'll be paid pretty well. It's a good career full of diversity where not only everyone is different and every company is different, but the roles you can do is different. It's not one job, is it? There's 100 different roles, and an application security engineer to a compliance specialist are completely different jobs, just in one industry. And that then goes a long way too, just like technology, that you can be in security and work in finance and work in government and work in manufacturing and retail. I love retail. It's I wouldn't say the Wild West, but it's so free for creativity within security because you're not stuck behind a wall of compliance. And you can change jobs entirely. In the police, you can get bored of being a detective and become a traffic officer, or try to become a dog handler, or become on the confined search team with diving. There's so many jobs you can do. It's the same in InfoSec. You can just change and you can do different things. Go to a completely different industry in a completely different role, applying the same principles that and continue to be creative and innovative with your own personal background that no one else has.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how cool someone's background sounds somewhere else. Everyone's unique background is unique for a reason and useful in its own reason. That's why I would say come over.
I love that. James, if anyone wanted to reach out to you about either InfoSec, where to get your book, what competition you're doing next, or if they have an IT question, where's the best way to contact you?
So I'm on LinkedIn as James Moncrieff. I can be reached on there for any questions for anything. If they were interested in personal or executive coaching, I can be reached on there. If they're interested in public speaking, I can be reached on there. Any InfoSec questions, get me anywhere. And my books are available on Amazon.
They are.
Under the name J.E. Moncrieff, Pride of Blood and Shadow of the Crown. And I've just finished the sequel to Shadow of the Crown, which is my fourth book, called Wolf of the Crown. My first book is no longer for sale. It was my first book.
Why is it no longer for sale?
Because it was very much a first attempt. It was Key Stage 2 at best. Okay. And while it was a fun story, it was very poorly written. So I didn't want anyone who explores my books for the first time to read that first. So I've taken it off. Shadow of the Crown and then Wolf of the Crown, which is finished, and I'm just waiting for the cover to be created. Adam Jarman is a great designer. He's doing that for me. As soon as that's done, that will be on Amazon as well. But yeah, they're all there. J.E. Moncrieff.
Wow, what a lot to learn. I mean, James has done a lot. I couldn't keep up. I mean, I don't even think we talked about the hammer throwing publicly and all the other activities he does. But what a great man, and for giving up so much time for me today. And without him naturally knowing and just talking really well, he brought in so many topics that I feel really important about diversity, people joining the industry, how to tackle it, looking at it from a different pane of glass, and just all the incredible experience he has from the police that he can bring in, and his problem-solving ideas and processes just was fantastic. It was just really, really refreshing. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as me. I really hope we can contact Susan Pope, because obviously she was very pinnacle in his career and giving James that opportunity, and he wouldn't have been sat here today or doing all the good that he does. So that's incredible. So yeah, I'm going to put that on my team to see whether we can get hold of her and on the podcast. But if you do know Susan, or you'd like to join the podcast, or you have an idea of what we can do next on the next episode, then please do drop us a line, get in contact with us. It would be a pleasure to put that idea into place. Once again, thank you so much for listening to the Core Podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.